Hey guys, Nefis here. Yesterday I was supposed to make a build video. Unfortunately, that did not come to fruition due to the many things that were thrown at me. Thrown at everybody in the world of the Elder Scrolls Online. It seems we got a lot of pissed off people, especially a pissed off Gina Bruno. So I'm going to be going over the entirety of the PTS patch notes 5.1.0. And I'm going to be looking at this in a very PvE specific scope. If you want opinions on this from a PvP, I suggest you check them out on Twitch or YouTube. But yeah, the story basically behind all this, the PTS notes. So it was released yesterday night, which is a very unusual time because the PTS patch notes are usually put out on the day of the PTS, which is typically on a Monday or the night before sometimes. However, there was a very interesting story as to why the PTS patch notes were released pretty early. And the story goes basically that Checkmath, a former class representative, was banned from the forums in the game because he broke the class rep non-disclosure agreement in regards to the next Scalebreaker update. In fact, you guys can actually still have access to this Google Doc link where this is the leaked patch notes, and the leaked patch notes were everywhere for a day or two. It was in every Discord server that's ESO related. It was in game. I mean, people were talking about it on the forums quite a bit. And a lot of people were asking, wow, this actually looks legit, the format, whatever. There's even like this copy pasta of the ZOS logo. And a lot of people kept asking Gina and ZOS, hey, are these patch notes real? So it got so bad to the point that Gina had to respond on a Discord she's in. She said, I'm posting the real ones here tonight to squash all this bullshit. So, sorry, I was spending time with my kid on my weekend, and now I just got on my PC to do work. I still need to finish them, but I still plan to post tonight. It's late here though, and yeah, that's pretty much it. She seemed pretty angry about it, and basically, they also mentioned this in passing. I don't know why they had to mention this at the beginning of the patch notes. It seems a little weird that I don't know if this is like a warning, a public warning to the current class representatives that they should not break the NDA. I feel like this should have been a separate post, but whatever. In order to squash the ongoing rumors surrounding certain leaked patch notes and what might be real or fake, we decided to publish the real patch notes a Saturday evening before the PTS update for Scalebreaker and Update 23. The responsible party associated with these leaks is no longer a part of our programs or community and has been introduced to our friends in the legal department. So the differences between the leaked patch notes and the finalized Week 1 PTS patch notes it's mostly the same. Like 90% is the same. They did fix a few things here and there, or there's a few differences here and there as well, but mostly it's the same. And I have no idea. I personally have no idea what the NDA entails in terms of the penalties if you break it. If it was like a very specific penalty or something, the guy probably has to do it, has to pay it. If it was a very general penalty, I don't know how they're going to go about it. But again, this is a really weird part. I don't know if it's like a public warning, but sure. So a lot of people are very dismayed, or everyone's saying, oh, I'm going to quit next patch. Oh, these changes are shit. These are the worst patch notes since Morrowind. And I think most of it is actually pretty okay, pretty decent. Most of it. There are, of course, really ridiculous, insane, really questionable and stupid changes. And I'll get to those first before I start reviewing the entire thing, so you guys have a grasp of what the situation is. But in short, the summary basically of the patch notes is general nerfs across the board for damage to address the power creep and so on, while pretty much shaking up the game yet again. Do I support this kind of approach? not really. Do I support their ZeniMax's ambitious strategy of 2 DLCs, 1 expansion, and a huge update per year? Not really, no. Do I support that they keep churning out content when there are a lot of game-breaking bugs that aren't addressed for weeks, months, years? No, I don't. But in the specific context of looking at these, this combat update, I would say most of it, like 80% of it, is actually pretty okay changes, pretty decent. The remaining 20% is like, I don't know where it came from. I don't know why anyone would put it on the patch notes. So we'll go over that later. But right now, my opinion is probably very unpopular. But I'm sure that will probably like become the more accepted opinion over time as the PTS patch notes come out every week and they start readjusting. A lot of people seem to forget that this is week 1 PTS patch notes. Week 1 hasn't even started, and people are already freaking out about it, being really emotional. Like there's a lot of emotional backlash over it for whatever reason. Well, for some of the changes I understand, but for just the entire patch notes, I don't understand why people are crying out, "I'm gonna quit," or "This is the worst patch note since Morrowind." It's not. It really isn't. In my opinion, it's better than Murkmire in some respects, or Nerfmire as it was more commonly called. So I need to also explain their new strategy from what we can glean from the outside for ZeniMax. So if you guys remember earlier this year, Eric Roble, who was the lead combat designer for The Elder Scrolls Online, quit or was fired. I don't know, there's no specifics. And then Brian Wheeler, Brian Wheeler took over as the lead combat designer. And I believe he detailed out, I think I recall an outline or something that they're going to start combat audits, and they're going to be like streamlining and standardizing stuff. Well, a few months later, here we are. They are trying to standardize stuff, as we'll see. But before we get started on the patch notes here, we're going to be looking at probably the worst changes of the patch notes first. So we'll get those juicy bits out of the way in this video, so you guys don't have to, watch through potentially almost 2 hours of the video. I'm not sure how long this video will be. I did make a video late last night into the morning, but the audio didn't record, so I guess we're going to do this all over again. So the worst patch note changes is in regards to probably the healing. There's a lot of mention of the healing. Let's just grand heals. So, let's see. They, for whatever reason, they are dumbing down the healer role. Not a build, not a class, but the role itself. And it's just really disappointing to see that someone thought this was a great idea. Not only are they dumbing the role down, they're also stripping it of its identity. And you guys will see what I mean. We got a slight buff. Well, not a slight buff, but we got a slight buff to the combat pair, whatever, that's whatever, this is a whatever. But the grand healing, this is where it starts to get really weird. Grand healing converted this ability into a true AoE heal over time rather than a hybrid, spammable hybrid heal over time. I don't know what they really mean by hybrid in the case of grand healing, which is healing springs. I don't really find that there's a problem with spamming healing springs. I find that healing in ESO can be pretty dynamic, can be pretty enjoyable, placing multiple heals in multiple areas as a preemptive measure as well. Basically what they're going to do is you can not only have one healing springs active at a time, and this is not really increasing the difficulty of healing as a role. It's increasing the difficulty for other roles in the group. You now absolutely have to have people coordinate in certain spots for certain fights and trials or dungeons, because you can't imagine you have one group on one side, or like two in the dungeon. Let's just imagine we have 2 people on one side because of mechanics, one person on the other side, the healer's in the middle. Who do you springs? You obviously see the problem here, and I don't know where the hell this change came from, but they need to scrap it immediately, in my opinion. Sure, reduce the healing, but the fact that it's only one active at a time, I don't know where this came from. I really don't. Cost reduction, great. And the changes to healing springs and lustrous heals, I mean, even that's like bearable. But I honestly don't know why they think it's an issue that you can spam it. Healing Springs was sort of buffed. This ability now grants 30 magicka every time it heals an ally, rather than restoring 330 magicka for up to 3 allies healed by the initial hit. This will result in a higher return if you hit 6 players for the full duration. And the Healing Springs is now 8 seconds instead of 3 seconds. And you can't stack it because, again, you can only have 1 Healing Springs active at a time. And they even know here it will require more coordination to obtain, but it's like, there's no point. Illustrious Healing, this ability continues to increase the duration. So the need duration is a total of 12 seconds, up to 12 seconds from 8 seconds. I don't know. This is like a pretty bad change, in my opinion. It doesn't make the healing roll any better, any more difficult. It doesn't. It really just dumbs it down, really. And I just don't really agree with it. I know a lot of healers don't agree with it. They're right. Like, it makes no sense why this change came about. The next really weird change to healing is nerfing regeneration. Increased the healing per tick by approximately 98%. However, they reduced the duration to 10 seconds. It can now only hit 1 ally per cast. I personally, most healers in endgame PvE or PvE in general don't or shouldn't use regeneration in most cases. There are certain fights where, yes, you need to use it, like in Assault and Sanctorium as a group healer and a tank healer. I don't think this is a huge nerf to it. I think because in the context of PvE, if you're group healer, you'll typically only hit DPS in positions 3 to 6 most of the time with mutagen or regeneration or whatever you want. As a tank healer in VAS, you're pretty much going to only be hitting yourself, your main tank, and the off tank occasionally. I don't really think it's something that was needed to be done, in my opinion. I think 2 targets per cast would have been fine. I think it's sort of weird that they would also increase the cost as well. This is probably a very PvP oriented change. It won't affect PvE too much, in my opinion. However, in my opinion, it was just like a really unnecessary one. But and then another weird change they did, again in regards to probably PvP, increased the base shield size of this ability by approximately 14%, but reduced the bonus scaling to 100% from 300%. So basically what this means is Healing Ward would actually heal you in proportion to how much health you're missing, up to 300% additional shield strength. And that shield strength would translate into heal amount. And they're getting rid of that. This morph will no longer heal you for Healing Ward after the shield ends, because the shield hardly remains to do that, which is pretty debatable, especially in PvE. And specifically for Veteran Sunspire. The Ice Dragon boss fight looks these. A lot of healers have switched over to using the Black Rose Perfected Resto Staff and use the Healing Ward to great effect. I think this will definitely make that fight a bit harder on the healers. I think Sunspire in general is it's probably the most stressful for the healer role. I don't see why they need to do this, but again, a very PvP oriented change. This morph will now heal you once every second for 25% of the remaining shield size instead, to ensure you gain effectiveness out of it. I would have to test this actually on the PTS to see if it makes a huge difference for certain scenarios, but again, it's a weird change. And the worst change here for healers in the game, for everybody, for every class, is the change to Necrotic Org. It kind of makes me laugh that they even thought this was a great idea. Necrotic Org, they reduced the base cost of the ability in its morphs. Cool. They reduced the damage per tick of this ability and the Mystic Orb morph by approximately 13%. Whatever. You can only have one orb active at a time. You can only have one orb active at a time. You can only have one orb active at a goddamn time. I don't know. I really don't know where this came from. Like it's evident to me that some people over at ZeniMax in the combat team are oblivious to the fact what group play is in PvE. I'm sure a lot of peers wouldn't want this either. But for PvE, this is pretty devastating for the healer role and for raid groups in general. The fact that orbs weren't just used for healing. To summarize, orbs allow for really cool gameplay on part of the healers. It gives them room to debuff and buff for the group. It allows the healers to apply certain status effects, like certain debuffs on the boss, while they stop healing. Essentially, basically, putting out multiple orbs to the group not only provides healing done, it provides time for the healers to do other extraordinary things that allows us to enjoy the game. Thirdly, it also takes away sustain, and this is a huge part of why this change needs to be scrapped immediately. I think, in my opinion, ZeniMax is like the American Congress. Put something so bad in the legislative bill that the other side just vehemently opposes it to the point where they retract it. But at the same time, nobody reads the entire legislation anyway, and they sneak some really suspect changes. That's what happened in Murkmire with the minor toughness change from Warhorn to just specifically the Warden class. Because everybody was outraged. Everybody was outraged about the shield cast time and the fact that it was also interruptible, to the point where ZeniMax was like, "Oh, you caught us red-handed. Oh, we'll retract this." But everybody sort of just ignored the other weird changes that went through because of that. So I would strongly suggest you guys look over the patch notes yourself and strongly voice your opinion and pressuring ZeniMax to really reconsider like a lot of these changes in terms of the healing, because some of these don't make sense at all. Like, we cannot just focus on the orb problem. It's a huge problem, because I'm going to continue again. The sustain is an issue. We had this problem before. I don't know how they haven't learned this from Morrowind. Do you guys remember Morrowind? Because I remember Morrowind. Everybody quit Morrowind. There were literally almost no PvE raid guild really seriously raiding. There was a lot of people leaving the game. It was really hard to fill the rosters. I mean, if you think filling rosters is pretty hard nowadays, imagine back in Morrowind, you couldn't even fill half a roster for even progression groups. Progression guilds died. Why? Because the gameplay is not enjoyable. You are forced to do heavy attack builds. Because, yes, the sustained nerfs to champion points, like the removal of stam cost reduction and magic cost reduction, was needed, but they kept hitting every source of sustain after that. Like, they could have stopped there. And this change, you can only have one orb active at a time. You have to realize something here, guys. You have at most 2 healers in your raid team currently. You can't really put more healers in, because that wouldn't make sense. Most of PvE content in ESO is about DPS. It's very DPS centric. You can skip mechanics, you can have an easier time the more DPS you have. It's intended. Like, the more DPS your group has, the easier it is. But imagine being a healer, being one of the 2 healers, and you have to provide orbs for at least 10 other people. Who's gonna get the first? Like, what if you need healing done? You know what I mean? Orbs are a lot of healing done too. What do you tell your raid team? Hey guys, I'm gonna send out an orb. Don't synergize it. And you're gonna have people starving for resources. People will definitely need to consider other alternative sets that will not only I don't know. It's really bad. It's really bad. We cannot have another Morrowind again. We really cannot. So this change needs to just go away. I don't know whose idea it was. I don't care whose idea it was. This change needs to go away. It literally does nothing for healers. It literally does nothing for DPS. It doesn't do anything for tanks. It doesn't do anything for PvE content. It doesn't make the content harder. It just makes the game less enjoyable. That's it. I could care less if the content was harder. Yay. But the gameplay, come on. Like, ESO has probably one of the better combat systems out there in terms of MMOs. And to think that taking essential things away from that system is like, why would you do that to your own game? I don't understand it. And here they're like, you know what? You guys can have one orb active only at one time per caster, but we sped the orb up to 2 meters per second from 3 meters per second. I don't know. I really don't know. Cool, I guess, but one orb? Come on. Like, I don't think the people who made this idea has ever done a trial or even a dungeon. Like, come on. Or even an arena, like Dragonstar Arena. Just go do Dragonstar Arena. Go do Black Rose Prison and try having one orb. I don't know. I just don't get it. And they also reduced the healing per tick, which again is fine. But this is like, wow. I'm kind of speechless at this point. I'm done. Like, there's nothing more to say. But yeah, in terms of the healing changes, the orb change, the grand healing change, and the weird changes to regeneration and healing ward, not very good. Not very good at all. The next worst change about these patch notes is probably the reasoning behind Caltrips. Caltrips, they reduce the base cost, cool. Increase the snare potency, whatever, kind of irrelevant for PvE. Reduce the damage per tick by approximately over 60%, and increase the duration 10 seconds from 10 seconds to 10 seconds from 12 seconds. These changes apply to all morphs. This is pretty bad because for stamina DPS, Caltrips is the bread and butter, one of the bread and butter dots, and which taking away the skill for a better skill is mostly fine for most PvEers. However, this doesn't address the fact that they've completely gone against the ideology, their own idea of this patch note. Because they were at the beginning of the patch notes, if you read on about like around here somewhere, they're going to say, hey, we want to address the combat balance, we want to address the fact that there are obviously better skills to use, we want to make sure that there are no dead skills. However, this change at Caltrips is pretty much making Caltrips a dead skill. No one in PvE is ever going to use them for a damage skill. I mean, maybe, I don't know what they're going with this. I don't know what their direction is with Caltrips. Is this going to be for tanks only? Is that why they increase the snare potency? Is this a PvP change? I really can't tell. It's not like PvPers were complaining about Caltrips anyway, so I'm going to assume they want this to be more of a support skill in PvE. But like, no one's gonna use it. No tanks really gonna use it, even if you reduce the cost by 600 stamina. It doesn't matter. For DPS, no one's gonna use anti-cavalry Caltrips. They're not gonna use Razor Caltrips. It doesn't even deal initial hit damage, but instead applies Major Fracture to enemies hit by the dot up to 4 seconds. No one asked for this. No one asked for the Major Fracture. And obviously there's better ways of applying Major Fracture, and it's like you have Noxious Breath from Dragon Knight, which is already the most dominant tank class in the Elder Scrolls Online, so you'll definitely have a tank with Major Fracture, AoE Major Fracture. You have Necromancers now with Boneyard that apply both Major Fracture and Major Breach. You have the option of doing Night Mother's Gaze. I mean, I would rather do Night Mother's Gaze than Caltrips, to be fairly honest, guys, because this change doesn't make sense, personally. I'm not really like, I don't really care about the the fact that there's a damage nerf, really. I mean, I feel like the damage nerf itself was way too much, but the fact that this skill goes nowhere for anyone in PvE is like, what the hell? You know what I mean? Like, the next worst changes about the patch notes for Scalebreaker is probably in regards to Dragon Knight and Nightblade classes. And I'll be explaining here why. Fiery Breath was nerfed. Essentially, a slight cost increase plus a decrease in dot damage. I don't think this was needed. Mag DKs and PvE are not in a very good spot compared to Mag Plars, Mag Sorks, or even Mag Blades, arguably. However, whatever, I guess. Even in PvP, I guess I'm not really going to touch PvP there, but I don't think this was really needed. Lava Whip, again, I don't think this was needed either, especially for PvE. Searing Strike fixed an issue, blah blah, increased the cost to. They increased it, which is not a huge deal, as it was pretty cheap already. But again, if the orb change and such are gonna stick, it's gonna be pretty bad. Increased the dot damage by approximately 26% per tick, so we saw a slight buff to the dot on Searing Strike, while seeing a slight reduction in dot damage for Engulfing Flames. Earth and Heart, Ash Cloud. They decreased the ability of the healing of Ash Cloud. I really don't know why. Increase the cost of all morphs. Okay, well, this is, again, Mag DKs have a huge sustain issue, especially in PvE. They also reduce the damage over time of Eruption. Again, I think it was a bit too heavy of a nerf. No one was really doing great parses on the Mag DK in PvE and raids to warrant such a heavy nerf. I mean, I can see that they're doing a general nerf across the board at this point, but I don't think Mag DKs needed to be touched. Petrify increased the cost of this ability and its morphs to 4,050 from 2,970, so this is more for PvP. They also nerfed it by decreasing the range to 7 meters from 8 meters, which is, I don't think that's a very good change either, in my opinion, for PvP, but whatever, that's just a personal opinion. For Nightblades in particular, the one change we'll be looking at that wasn't so good is a Twisting Path nerf. I think Magic and Nightblades are not in a very good spot right now in PvE. Most people don't even play Magic and Nightblades anymore after Elsewhere, because the best Magic DPS classes are Magic Sorks, Magic Templars. Even after the proposed PTS Week 1 notes, they'll still be on top of Nightblades. I don't think the Twisting Path nerf was needed. I think if they hadn't touched Nightblade at all for this patch, it'd be fine. I mean, they're not in a very good spot. They're arguably just as bad as Mag DKs and Mag Wardens currently in raids. So I don't know why they had to touch it. So that's pretty much it for the worst parts of the patch notes. And next we'll be delving into pretty much the rest of the patch notes to see what else they changed. So to start off the patch review, we're going to be looking over the new item sets from the DLC dungeons. This includes Hollowfang Thirst, Drozakar's Claws, and Renald's Resolve from Moongrave Fane. I don't think this is going to be a great set. I mean, maybe for healers if this orb change sticks true. However, it's like a magic restoration, not just both Stam and Magic Restoration, so I don't know if this will ever have an application in PvE raids, maybe PvE dungeons, depending on the good dungeon content. We have Drozakar's Claws, we have Physical Pen, Weapon Crit, Stam Recovery for every bleed effect you have on your enemy, increase your weapon damage by 200 against them. Not sure how this will go for PvE, we'll have to test it for PvE on the PTS. Renald's Resolve, max health, healing taken, max health. It's basically when you deal direct damage, which is light attacks or something of the like, you gain a stack of Resolve for 10 seconds, up to 8 stacks. So it also increases your physical and spell resistance, plus your healing taken by 1% per stack. So you're gonna have roughly about 3,600-ish resistances and 8% healing taken. I don't think this is gonna be really needed for PvE. We have the Grudwolf Monster Mask, dungeon set, Undaunted Monster set. We have Weapon Crit, Spell Crit. Whenever you deal crit damage, restore 1,000 magic or stamina, whichever maximum is higher. You also gain 500 on the other resource. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. Mathematically speaking, this is a pretty good sustain set. I don't know if they had the orb change in mind when they did this. I don't think it's worth replacing Slime Crawl or other damage sets for this. Sustain for the most part is fine, depending on how you set up your raid group, but I don't know about this set. It will really depend on the other PTS changes that are coming in the few weeks to come. From the layer of MRSA Lock, we have Zen's Redress, which is basically a very interesting set actually. Magicka Rico, spell damage, max Magicka, your light attacks apply the Eye of Zen on enemies for 20 seconds. Enemies with the Eye of Zen take an additional 2% more damage for each dot you placed on them, up to 10%. For group play, this might be worth it. Potentially, because if it's a 20-second duration and the target takes an additional 2% more damage per dot people put on them in raid, well, I guess it's a limit of 10%, but still, 10% additional damage taken is not a joke, especially in raid, so I don't know if this would apply to the group as well. Azure Blight, Reaper, crit, Stam, Rico. When you deal damage with a dot, you apply a stack of Blight Seed to your target for 5 seconds. At 20 stacks, the Blight Seeds explode, dealing blah blah blah. I don't think this is great for PvE. Dragon's Defilement. Sounds cool. Max stam, max health. When you take damage from a melee attack, gain a corrupting aura for 5 seconds that applies minor fracture and minor breach to all enemies near you, lowering their physical and spell resistance by 1320. This effect can occur every 5 seconds, so basically there's no cooldown. But I guess it's a very specific proc condition from a melee. For Dragon's Defilement Heavy, we have max stam, max health. When you take damage from melee attacks, there's a specific proc condition. You gain a corrupting aura for 5 seconds that applies minor fracture and minor breach to everyone near you, lowering their physical and spell resistance by 1320. This occurs every 5 seconds. I can see this sort of working for like Dragonstar Arena or in Black Risk Prison, especially if you're not going to take a Templar or something in there with you. But again, the specific proc condition, I guess it's fine, technically. It's definitely worth testing out in a place like Black Rose or Dragonstar Arena. The Monster Mask, MRSA Lock, this is going to be interesting. Max Stam, when you bash an enemy, you spew a cone of corruption, dealing 8,000 disease damage to enemies. This damage is increased by 5% for each negative effect the enemies have, up to 150% additional damage. Holy crap, this effect can occur once every 7 seconds. When you bash an enemy. I mean, this could actually replace Velodreth, not gonna lie, because you have so many negative effects on bosses and raids. And if that goes up to 150% additional damage, that's insane. Oof. That is pretty insane, guys. We're gonna be skipping the collectibles, titles, dies, whatever. I forgot to mention this earlier, but the other worst change about this patch is probably Guild Trader multi-bidding. Not the system itself, but how many spots you get for each guild. And it's like you get 10 total options to bid on a trader. This is very troubling because it diminishes the blind bid system for the Guild Trader bidding system. Basically, there's no risk to start aggressive trade wars anymore. You can basically probe everyone. You can basically do so without any risk of losing your trader. I mean, it's not a very good change. I mean, it's a very good system in my opinion. Like one or two backup spots is fine, but 10 is like that can be abused pretty quickly, and this won't help the issue with the shadow guilds and the troll guilds on both console and PC, who can easily get past 50 guild members each and still take spots from actual trade guilds. So this is not a very good change. 10 different guild trader spots. On Valorant Key Improvements, I went over this and this in my previous video. Good quality of life improvements. We're getting a buff to jewelry crafting master rates. Basically, they're making it more worthwhile for you to do them. They're giving even more vouchers. This is like the third time they actually had to do this for jewelry crafting rates. They're giving you more grid vouchers and chances of getting like a legendary task to do it. Like, you don't want to upgrade to gold jewelry because that's a lot of gold invested just to get a couple hundred or a few hundred red vouchers. It's just not worth the gold investment to do them right now, and the changes are not retroactive. So every jewelry crafting master red you have right now is probably just worthless. Master red merchant updates, whatever, new collectibles, whatever. We've updated some item sets. For Phoenix, when you drop below 25% health, you gain a damage shield that absorbs 10,000 damage for 6 seconds and deals whatever to nearby enemies. The effect can occur once every 1 minute. Well, that's interesting. could be actually stronger than the old set in some regards. But the old set, I'm glad they kind of addressed this issue, because there were a lot of people cheesing No Death achievements and trials and DLC dungeons by using Phoenix, which is, I guess, fine, whatever, but it shouldn't. It was never intended to work like that, and obviously they addressed that with this change. Way of Martial Knowledge, this is going to be a very interesting set to test out on the PTS for sure. While your stamina is below 75%, which is very likely if you're a DPS, your light attacks cause the enemy to take a 10% additional damage for 4 seconds. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. However, Martial Knowledge, I believe, is a Magicka set. So maybe this could be a healer set. I mean, 10% additional more damage is not a joke, especially like every 6 seconds. I mean, well, essentially it's every for 4 seconds, but it occurs every 6 seconds, so you have a 2-second cooldown, basically. That's not bad at all. And Elemental Succession, this could be one of the next best sets, to be honest, because the old set, while you are in combat, you gain rotating bonus to flame, shock, or frost damage. The active element changes every 4 seconds. Your attacks dealing damage with the active element gain 515 spell damage. But the new set is crazy. And it's even more crazy with the Force Pulse buff we'll read later on in the patch notes. Whenever you deal flame, shock, or frost damage, you gain 500 spell damage for that element for 4 seconds. This effect occurs every 8 seconds per element. You can have multiple different elemental buffs active simultaneously. This basically, I'm interpreting it as you can have up to 1500 additional spell damage, which is pretty damn insane for 4 seconds with a cooldown of 4 seconds. So this is definitely going to be an interesting set to test. It looks to be pretty strong on paper, but we'll see. Overwhelming Surge, basically kind of whatever. You just get the amount of Magicka back. 50% of damage you deal this way is restored to you as Magicka. That's the only difference. Trinamax Valor, this is also an interesting change that I'm sure will need testing, because some of these patch notes are kind of vague. So like the old Trinamag, it's like you had a 20% chance to call down a fragment to heal your allies and stuff every like 5 seconds. 20% chance. But now it's like guaranteed chance that you call down this fragment that heals you and the people around you for 4,000 health and damages enemies for 4,000 Magicka damage. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. Now the curious thing is, if you're a Dragon Knight healer or something, does this mean per Igneous Shield casted or per shield that everyone gets? This is something we need to test out on the PTS for sure, because if it's per shield everyone gets plus the shield resistances plus that's a lot of healing done. I don't think it's going to be like that, but one can hope. The medium armor, such as Bite, when you use dodge roll, you increase your crit damage by 12% for 8 seconds. Okay. When you deal direct damage while 10 meters or further from your target, you have a 15% chance to heal for 1,000 health and 1,000 stamina. Since it is no longer a melee proc condition, the set will also drop in bows and staves. Okay, so it's an okay update to that set. Eternal Warrior, when you drop below 25% health, you heal for 12,500 health and gain 100 ultimate. Effect occurs every minute. I can definitely see this being really, really good for certain DLC dungeon content like Frostfall on the tank. Definitely we'll consider this set in the future. So the PvE tank, Immortal Warrior, while your health is below 35%, gain major protection, reducing the damage you take by 30%. No tank is really gonna be voluntarily go below 35% and stay there for a while. Like, I don't know where you could use this. You don't need it in most hard-hitting boss encounters like the Warrior, Olms, Zamaja. You don't need it. So this is kind of whatever. 7th Legion Brute, when you cast an ability that increases your physical spell resistance, you gain 350 weapon damage and 350 health recovery per 10 seconds. No cooldown essentially, because it occurs every 10 seconds. This is kind of definitely a better update, because you don't need it. There's no proc condition. You just need to proc your source of major ward, major resolve, or even I guess minor ward, minor resolve, if you're a stam stroke or something. This is going to be an interesting set to test out in PvP. We have Veiled Heritance, when you interrupt an enemy, you gain 500 weapon damage for 5 seconds. For PvE, maybe if you're like a stamina DPS interrupter in the Sodom Sanctorium, maybe. Ravager, each time you attempt to reduce the target's physical or spell resistance, so basically elemental drain, pierce armor, whatever, or power to light, I guess. Uh, any minor or major armor pen debuff, you gain a stack of Ravager for 5 seconds, increasing weapon damage by 125. But you gain a stack every 1 second. Holy shit, at 4 stacks, the duration doubles but cannot be refreshed. This can definitely have applications in PvP, not so for PvE in my opinion. Let's see, we're going to skip all that, we're going to skip all that, blah, blah, blah. This is going to be a huge quality of life change. However, it does come at a cost, unfortunately. Just like having to do the Sky Shard achievements to purchase the Sky Shards on your alternate characters. From the Crown Store, you now need to unlock the achievements per skill line to buy them on other characters. So it's going to work the same as the Sky Shard purchases from the Crown Store. I'm just kind of curious how much it is, because this actually provides a way out for a lot of people who don't want to grind Alliance War as PvE players, and people who don't want to grind out Undaunted if they're PvP players. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of purchases for Mage's Guild. The Sigic Order, Soul Magic, Vampire, and Werewolf skill lines will become available in the future update. Well, that's cool. Probably one of the better quality of life changes. Though I'm kind of sad it has to come at an actual money cost. A lot of people are calling this pay to win. It's not really pay to win. It's just pay for convenience, which is fine. And we're gonna have some really random changes over here, or fixes over here, I guess. And here we have the Necromancer nerfs that were expected for quite a while since elsewhere PTS. So Blast Bones, fine, they improved it. Boneyard, they increased the cost, which is fine. Decreased the damage, which again is fine because it was mostly the tanks that use it, or DPS used it for as a source of looksties, not really for the damage. Increased the bonus damage modifier for consuming a corpse to 50% from 20%, whatever. Pest and Colossus, the total adjustment will result in an approximate 5% damage reduction. Pest and Colossus is pretty insanely strong in PvE. I'm surprised that they decided to go with a 5% damage reduction. The major vulnerability it offers plus the base damage it gives is pretty great. I can foresee in the future they'll probably readjust the 5% to something else again. We have an increasing cost. So the one thing I'm worried about, especially for Magic Necromancers and Stamina Necromancer DPS, is sustain is still an issue for them. So I'm not sure if the cost increase is really needed. However, they did increase the damage per tick by approximately 90%. We'll have to see what sustain is like on Macro and Stamcrow. Shocking Siphon. This is kind of a weird change because it's a very buggy skill. The ability and Smorts will now update their hitboxes when fighting large enemies. I guess they're trying to address the fix for it, for how buggy it is. These abilities no longer have a resource cost, they're free. So I guess they added the cost to Boneyard and Skeletal Mage because they made Shocking Siphon free, like Repentance. It decreased the damage per tick by approximately 14%. And also now, and the Magicka Morph now restores 35 Magicka per tick instead of 75, which puts the Necromancer class at a lower rate than the Wardens betting edges. Bone Tyrant, Bitter Harvest got buffed essentially, increased the healing per tick by approximately 11%, which is a great buff for Necromancer tanks. Bone Goliath Transformation fixed an issue where he could occasionally become a terrifying giant. And there's a lot of funny videos on YouTube about that. Living Death, Render Flesh, fixed an issue where the Shadow Tree was applying to the Minor Defile. Cool. Restoring Tether, same thing as Shocking Siphon. There's no cost to it, and now scales off your highest defensive stats. Decreases the healing per tick, but the Stamina Morph is also decreased again. Necromancers no longer outshine Wardens in this department. Spirit Mender, they increased the cost here again by almost 2,000 Magicka, but increased the healing per tick by approximately 90%. Now it's even more questionable which you would take as a Necromancer healer, whether it's this Intensive Mender or the Spirit Guardian, whatever it's called, the one that gives you a Poor Man's Guard for 10% damage mitigation. because Intensive Mender now heals for twice as much per tick rather than 3 times. It's a slight nerf, but it also reduces the duration, but also reduces the cost to have. So it's kind of debatable, even more debatable at this point. We're gonna skip all this because it's just issues they fixed, which is good. Oh my god, please don't tell me they fixed White Gold Tower. I mean, nerf White Gold Tower. Okay, well, Educator can't chain her anymore, I guess. It's Dragon Knight. They had to fix an exploit. I mean, do people really have to use exploits to beat White Gold Tower? Okay, whatever. Halls of Fabrication. They fixed an achievement. The Assembly General will no longer cast Bombardment while walking to the center of the counter area. Wow, I thought that was intended. I mean, that's going to make healing that place a little bit easier with the blade going through the group and stuff, but it's pretty cool. Let's see. We have more changes to zones, overland, fixes and improvements, more quests, and now here we are at the juicier parts. Combat and abilities. Here, okay, so I misspoke earlier. Here there are less overall situations with dead abilities. This was what I was talking about when I was talking about Caltrips. Like, the PTS patch notes made Caltrips a dead ability essentially for DPS. Like, I wouldn't run it as a tank either. Like, it just doesn't make sense that they're going against this idea with Caltrips. So I would hope that they revisit Caltrips and readjust the damage nerf. I mean, 60% is too much, and the fact that no one's going to use it, again, goes against the idea of them trying to get rid of skills that aren't being used, or update the skills that aren't being used. Increase the duration of the off-balance effect to 7 seconds from 5 seconds. It's pretty cool for PvE damage. All player sources of bleeds will now respect the target's physical resistance, so rending slashes and stuff like that used to, and the bleeds from the axe procs to go through resistances on both players and bosses. So this is gonna be a slight nerf to bleeds for sure. And they also fixed what the weapon swap bugs, plus your character is becoming stuck in casting one of these abilities, which is a great thing they should have done. They should have fixed this like months ago. I'm just glad that they're finally addressing it. Many dots, both single target and area of effect, have been re-standardized to follow similar behaviors to other ability types. I'm not sure what they mean here. What they mean by 2 other ability types. Area effect dots will now be 33% weaker than a single target dot counterpart and cost 30% more, just like direct damage AoEs versus single target ones. Interesting. Okay, so they'll say AoE dots will be 33% weaker than a single target dot. There's developer comment for things. Catch on. We can see many adjustments to the abilities of blah blah blah. We've also rebalanced more of these ability types. Cool. Adjusted the animations and cast times for ultimates, so that's cool. Another fix. Improved the responsiveness of leaving or CC breaking, knock up and knockback abilities. Okay, so hopefully the CC bugs are addressed and somewhat. Fixed scenario, okay. Pets will now properly skill and health and PvP, whatever. Sources of stamina, health, and magic cost reduction that are obtained from passives, abilities, or item sets are now all multiplicative rather than being a mixture of additive and multiplicative. This has some implications for things like Breton, but I don't think it's gonna really do anything negative. It's not really a nerf. It's actually a pretty good streamline that they did. Below is a list of the affected sources that has also made adjustments made to them, since this will ultimately increase the cost of abilities when using multiple sources of cost reduction. So they pretty much streamlined it. Yeah, that's pretty good. They even increased the Deucer's cost reduction. That's pretty cool. Next up, they finally fixed this issue that's been happening a lot more frequently since Clockwork City patch, causing players to not be visible to fellow group members. This is a fix that's been a long time coming. I hope it's actually a fix. I'm actually taking what they say with a grain of salt, because when they say they fix things, it usually ends up not being fixed or something else pops up in some random area of the game. So I'm glad they're at least trying to address these bugs. Buffs and debuffs major heroism, fix an issue where major heroism would stack with other major heroism sources. Minor lifesteal. The heal from this bonus will now use the activator's highest crit strike chance rather than only spell crits, so stamina DPS will also offer better minor lifesteal, which is pretty cool. I think we already went over Dragon Knight, Nightblade. I mean, these nerfs are, I don't know, very questionable for these two classes at this time, so hopefully they revisit them. For Sorcerer, it's generally buffs. The shield changes are kind of irrelevant for PvE, but this is more for PvP. And as far as I'm aware, there's been a lot of complaints about Sorks being too much in PvP, so this is aimed towards PvP for sure. But the Crystal Shard buff is actually pretty cool. It's actually them encouraging players to, hey, you know, actually try proccing crystal frags rather than spamming it, because I know a lot of Sorc players in the game, the first mistake is to think, hey, this is a spammable, but it's not. Crystal Fragments increases the bonus damage dealt of the proc from this ability to 33% from 20% to retain the damage of the proc, but they did reduce the base damage of the Crystal Shard if you intend on spamming it, so this is actually them rewarding you for better gameplay on your part. Empowered Ward, the final cost of this ability is now 3,780 instead of 4,320. It no longer gains blah blah blah. Hardened Ward, I mean, most people use Empowered Ward anyway for the minor intellect in PvE. Huge nerf to the pad, which honestly was needed because it was overperforming in PvE. Like max Sorcs are just like really at the top. Very easily comparable to Magplars because of the Winged Twilight, the Twilight Matriarch, or not the Matriarch, the Tormentor. The zap and kick attack from the Twilight and its Morse will now do the same damage. They also reduced the damage of the Winged Twilight and Twilight Matriarch by approximately 69% per hit. This is an okay change, okay nerf. Bolt Escape's no longer can be blocked. Overload, fixed heavy attack basically, sort of. And they also buff Liquid Lightning, which is pretty interesting. Decrease the cost of this ability and its morphs to 3,000, so we see an almost 500 magic cost reduction, which is great. Sorcs typically have a bigger sustain issue, just like Mag DKs. However, with the recent addition of False God and stuff like that, it's a lot less with Breton. They also decrease the damage per tick by approximately 37%. And Liquid Lightning now lasts 12 seconds. This is what I meant with the buff, because it's kind of awkward sometimes with Wall and Liquid Lightning, so I'm glad they're trying to standardize dot durations. Templar, Puncturing Strikes, it's basically cost reduction, decrease the cost of Spear Shards by 200-ish Magicka, but also they decrease the dot damage of Spear Shards and Luminous by approximately 37% per tick. Blazing Tikka is slightly harder nerf by 42% per tick. Again, this is fine, addressing power creep. Spear Wall increased the duration of the minor protection granted from this pass at 3 and 6 seconds from 1.5 to 3 seconds. That's cool. Dawn's Wrath. Eclipse is mostly for PvP. You guys can read it if you want. Solar Barrage decreased the damage of this morph by approximately 33% per tick. Again, fine. Most of the damage came from the empowerment anyway, not necessarily just the AoE. Sunfire reduced the cost of this ability and its morphs to 2376, almost a 400 magic cost reduction. Increased the dot damage by approximately 17% per tick, but they reduced the initial damage hit damage by approximately 70%, so this applies to Reflective Light, I'm assuming, and Vampire's Vein, because they said it's morphs as well. Restoring Light decreased the healing per tick by approximately 29% from Purifying Light. Irrelevant. Cleansing Ritual increased the healing per tick of this ability and its morphs by approximately 95%. So honestly, for Templars, it's a general buff, it seems. Increase the cost of these abilities. Okay, note these abilities continue to only take once every 2 seconds instead of the standard 1 seconds. This is due to the multifaceted operational powers ability bows. Okay, fair enough. Ritual Retribution. This morph no longer states it grants additional modifiers to the damage and healing, but instead deals damage for an identical coefficient of the heal, okay? Restoring Aura, fixed an issue where the minor endurance and minor intellect from this ability and its morphs for stacking with other sources, okay? Rush Ceremony, honor the dead morph, fixed an issue where this ability would cause animation stutters. Was it specifically with Honor Undead? Oh, that's interesting. The Wardens sort of got some love here, but they also did get a damage nerf. Again, I don't know why Mag Wardens and Stam Wardens are not in the best of spots compared to the Stam Crows and the other Mag classes. So I don't know about this nerf, but we'll see on the PTS yet again. They increased the cost of Swarm, but also increased the dot of Swarm by 17%. Green Balance, they buffed heal over time, but nerfed the burst heal. Arctic Wind was a huge buff over here because they increased the hot from the ability, and it's morphs by approximately 66%. That's huge for Warden tanks and Warden healers. It will now start scaling the heal at 5% of your max health per tick rather than 3%. So again, a pretty big buff to Warden tanks as well. That's honestly, like, it's actually a pretty great heal. And everything else is whatever. Okay, so to enter PvP, Cleave, 9% damage reduction. It'll still be insanely strong in PvE for sure. Critical Charge. PvP, Executioner, they buffed it. I don't know if two-hander will still be, the Executioner part will still be good for PvE. I don't know, like, I'm not gonna touch that. Uppercut, whatever. And here's where things get more into the PvE zone. One-handed shield. It seems their idea with one-handed shield, their vision for it is to just make it a tank, just for tanks, like a tank exclusive skill line, which is fine by me for PvE and PvP. I know there's been a lot of complaints about one-handed shield builds in PvP that are tanky and deal too much damage. But there's a lot more factors I feel like for that, not just the fact that one-handed shield allows for that. There's like CP, there's an issue of CP and so on, sets, and so forth. However, it seems they reworked the defensive posture ability to become an actual damage shield. We also have the reduction of the duration, which is fine because like it was kind of weird in PvE to have Absorb Magicka active for 30 seconds and it wouldn't go, like, it just wouldn't go away. Increase the cost, which is fine, I suppose. Damage shield scales off 30% of your max health, fine. This ability will continue to reflect once, but it will now reflect any projectile rather than only spell projectiles. So this is a pretty major change, as I'll discuss later. The defensive stance morph, this ability no longer stuns the targets if you successfully reflect an attack at them. Instead, this morph reintroduces the passive, which now increases to a maximum of 10% block mitigation cost reduction. So here they said they removed the block mitigation and the block cost reduction passive from defensive posture, but they added it back to this morph here. And the other morph, Absorb Magicka, is now called Absorb Missile because it will absorb both physical and Magicka damage from ranged adds. I think in terms of the options, Absorb Magic, or rather Absorb Missile, will be used for Black Rose Prison, specifically for the bosses that bleeds on you. Defensive Stance, however, will be used everywhere else outside of that for like Ohms or Zamaja or wherever you think you need it to mitigate damage plus give you block cost reduction, which the block cost reduction part was never really needed on most tank builds. Fortress, increased the cost reduction bonus from this passive to 7 and 15% from 5 and 10% to match our stamina weapon standards. That's pretty cool. So far for PvE tanks, it's like a great patch. Low slash, reduce the damage dealt from this ability, whatever. I mean, tanks are not parsing. These two abilities will no longer snare targets. This is more for PvP for sure. The minor heroism granted from this morph will now last 12 seconds, up from 9 seconds to better match the duration of the other bonuses. So again, they're standardizing the duration of the buffs from the skills with how long the actual duration of the skill lasts. However, I believe the Heroic Slash, let's see, never mind. Deep Slash, whatever, no one really uses for PvE. Power Bash, again for PvE, not really relevant. This is all for PvP. Puncture, reduce the damage dealt by this ability and morphs by approximately 37%, but reduce the cost to 1350 from 1701. Wow, another great change for PvE tanks. Like, this is like gotta make sustain really easy for tanks, in my opinion. Increase the duration of the major fracture to 15 seconds from 12 seconds to match the taunt duration. That again, they're standardizing the durations passive with the actual duration itself. That's a pretty good change. And here I'm gonna have to update my ransack versus pierce armor video, because ransack takes the cake for a lot of instances here. This morph no longer grants minor warden resolve, instead it grants minor protection for 15 seconds. That's pretty huge. It's a huge change. It's a huge damage mitigation change. It's a buff. It's a buff for tanks in PvE, because not only are you getting a cost reduction for your taunt, you're also going to get minor protection for 15 seconds. That's insane. But there will obviously still be times where you use pierce armor over ransack as a tank. Here we have a cost reduction dual wield as a blade cloak, and also decreased duration. No longer deals damage per tick, but instead deals damage every second. So it's a general nerf to that. Heavy blah blah. Hidden blade. There's another weird change in here that I'm going to show you guys. Increase the cost, reduce the range, reduce the damage by 25%. Abilities will now interrupt the target through casting attack. Cool. No longer applies major brutality instantly. However, light attacking or heavy attacking a target marked by Hidden Blade will grant you major brutality for 30 seconds. That's pretty, I mean, you got it from potions anyway. Shroud Daggers no longer deals increased damage per bounce, so there goes that. But can interrupt any target hit. This ability now only marks the initial target instead of any enemy with the bounce. Each hit deals our AoE damage standard. The Flying Blade now allows you to reactivate the ability free of cost on the marked target, which causes you to jump to the target, so this is a gap closer. That's kind of a really weird change, but okay. Lacerate, increase the size, reduce base damage done, but they increased the bonus per target hit. They reduced the damage done bonus per target hit to 3% from 5%. Now also converts into conal attack, fixing the issue where the heal would actually all critically strike. The Axe Bleed. This is a slight buff. The Axe Bleed from this passive now ticks every second instead of every 2 seconds. Increase the total damage done by approximately 24%. So this is going to be something we have to test yet again on the PTS, on the Scalebreaker DLC update, because it's going to be like, oh well, is it worth now using Axe plus Dagger, or is it still better to use dual wield daggers for PvE stamina DPS? And I'm kind of disappointed to see that there's no real change for maces. Like, maces absolutely need an update. This could have been the patch to do it. We have Twin Slashes, increase the damage over time from this ability and its morphs by approximately 37%. So we got a slight buff here, but we also have to take into account that Bleeds also got a slight nerf, or actually a pretty decent nerf, due to how it's actually going to work against resistances and not go through them. And for bow, some people were like, oh, my bow build is destroyed. Not really. Poison Arrow increased the cost, decreased the initial hit damage by approximately 17% on all morphs. However, they increased the dot by 78% per tick. Poison Injection, which is the more commonly taken morph, they reduced the total execute multiplier of this morph to 100% from 260%, starting at 25% on the boss's health or something like, or the target's health. However, they pretty much buffed Scatter Shot, essentially. No, not Scatter Shot, I'm sorry. They Snipe. I don't know why I was looking at Scatter Shot. The Snipe, they increased it by approximately 9% for this ability in its morphs. Plus Volley, they reduced the cost per volley. They increased the range at which you can do volley. They did get a slight nerf on volley, because instead of dealing damage every half second, now only deals damage every second. Plus, they seem to be also standardizing the dot duration to 12 seconds from 9 seconds. So all in all, not really a huge hit on the bow builds, in my opinion. Destruction Staff redesigned the ability and morphs to function as a dot rather than a utility skill. That's cool, I guess, for PvP. And here we have actually a pretty huge buff for magic DPS potentially. Force Shock increase the damage of this ability and its morphs by approximately 11%. This may single target wise put it as good as, or if not better than, Elemental Weapon from the Sigil Order skill line. Increases the chance to apply an elemental status effect to 10% per hit from 3%, since each hit is a direct damage attack. That's a huge buff, because we have to remember that there was a set over here. As you can see, whenever you deal blah 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 elemental damage, you gain 500 spell damage for that element for 4 seconds. Combine that with the change with Crushing Shock. I mean, this might actually be pretty damn good. And then to the morph, Crushing Shock decreases in cost instead of increasing in damage, so it's going to be doing less damage than Force Pulse for sure, not just in terms of single target, but definitely in terms of cleave, because they buffed the cleave it does by 172%. What a huge buff. The initial hits haven't really changed, besides the... I mean, it really hasn't changed. I mean, it's just a general buff. 11% more initial hit, and then they increased by 172% for the Force Pulse Cleave. So this is going to be a bit more of a competitive option now compared to Elemental Weapon, for sure, for a lot of instances, for a lot of fights. Pulsar, they just reduced the duration of Minor Mangle. Wall of Elements, they increased the duration to 8 seconds from 6 seconds. They decreased the cost, but they also decreased the damage per tick by approximately 33%, whatever. Let's see, Elemental Blockade, which is the morph that more people commonly use. Increase the duration from this ability to 9 seconds from 8 seconds, which ranks up to 12 seconds. So 12 seconds total. This is going to actually make some rotations pretty easier. I'm glad they're standardizing things like these for sure. And here we already talked about the ridiculous healing changes that really need to be scrapped. Armor passives, here we are, and armor skills. Annulment, they reduce the size of the shield of the light armor skill. Harness Magicka, Dampen Magicka. And here we have Harness Magicka no longer returns 3% of your max Magicka. However, it restores 5% of the ability's cost whenever it absorbs any damage. And this means right now you can only get Magicka back if you get hit by Magicka based damage, not physical damage. So it'll scale off of your cost of the ability and give you Magicka back regardless of what damage is incoming on you. We have Medium Armor Invasion. This is more for PvP. Heavy Armor. I don't know what their vision is or what their idea is with this Heavy Armor thing, but it's pretty hilarious actually. I can see it being used for some PvE fights where the tanks literally don't need to move, like Sodom Sanctorium hard mode, the Warrior in Hellra hard mode. Technically, pretty much almost every fight in Ethereal Archive. I mean, there's a lot of fights where tanks are stationary, even in Sunspire. So like, I don't know. This could be actually pretty good. It sounds pretty hilariously fucked up, but let's read it. The base ability is now called Unstoppable. Reduce the base cost, whatever. Increase the duration of CC immunity. You now have 65% reduced movement speed. That's a shit ton, dude. But that power comes at a great cost, Peter Parker. Immovable Brute. Rename this morph to Unstoppable Brute. It no longer passively reduces the cost of CC break, but instead reduces the cost of CC breaking while the Major Ward and Major Resolve are active. Increase the cost reduction per piece of heavy armor worn to 5% from 4%. Morph also grants reduction as it ranks up. And this is the more interesting morph in my opinion. Rename this morph to Immovable. This morph no longer increases the duration of the ability. Instead, while the snare persists, it increases the amount of damage you can block by 5% per piece of heavy armor worn, but also increases the snare potency by 5%. If you are in all 7 pieces of heavy armor, you'll truly be immovable. So unless elite difficulty enemies hit you with a special move, they don't care if you think if you think you're immovable. So what this basically means, guys, like 5%, like 5 times 7, that's 35, right? Add that 35% onto the 65% reduced movement speed, you literally just don't move. And like the fact that you get 35% more mitigation while blocking, up to 35% mitigation. Realistically, it's going to be like 25% mitigation. That's a lot of mit, taking into consideration the fact that plus resistances, one-handed shield, and all that. I mean, that's a lot of mitigation. I can definitely see Unstoppable being used a lot for certain fights. So, up to this point so far, DPS, slight nerfs, not really huge nerfs. Healers got absolutely fucked. Tanks, pretty great patch for tanks, to be honest. And we have actually buffs to the lines of Soul Magic, Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, and so on. Soul Strike, they actually increased the cost for it. For those of you in PvP, Soul Trap has been restructured to fit into our single target dot standard. So this might actually be a thing now for DPS to use, because it now also scales off weapon damage and spell damage. So stamina DPS can especially use it. Increase the damage per tick by approximately 161%. I mean, this could be a potential replacement for the Caltrips if they intend on sticking with the Caltrips change. They also removed the 2-second delay from these abilities, and so on. They also increased the amount of resources you get when a target affected by Consuming Trap dies from 10% to 20%. So that's pretty strong. Now, they buffed Devouring Swarm, they nerfed Clouding Swarm, Drain Essence, whatever for PvE, Misform, whatever for PvE. Werewolf, basically, they just nerfed the Werewolf in general. They increased the cost of werewolves. They also decreased the light attack damage, the light attack damage dealt by werewolves as well. Like here, reduce the damage dealt by your light and heavy attacks with this ability, and it's morphs by approximately 17%. I don't think it's that big of a nerf, in my opinion, for werewolves, because even with a 17% damage reduction on your light attacks and heavy attacks as a werewolf, you're still going to be hitting like a truck in PvE. I mean, all you do is literally just left click as a werewolf. So, I mean, it's pretty overpowered just for left clicking. So this changes. The nerf to werewolf is fine. I mean, you don't even really need to use most of the skills anyway as part of your werewolf rotation. So this is fine. The Fighters Guild, there's been actually some buffs here. Circle protection reduction, the reduction is huge. It's pretty draining on your stamina as a tank or a support stamina DPS to provide circle protection for your raid teams or your group. So the reduction is a pretty great buff to this skill. In addition to that, they also fixed an issue. This is a video I made. There's a video I made about this bug, and I'm glad they finally fixed it. They fixed an issue with this ability in S'mores where you cannot get the minor protection if you had minor endurance active prior to entering the area. So if you were a Nightblade or Standblade and you proc Merciless or Merciless Resolve, you would have minor endurance from that skill. And if you entered the circle, the two minor endurances would somehow override the minor protection. So I'm glad they fixed that. This also affected Wardens as well. Because Wardens got minor endurance from the fungal growth. Turn Undead can now fear any enemy in the area upon cast rather than only undead. Pretty huge buff. Not sure if I would still use it over class CC abilities like Talons or Grasp from Necromancer. This morph is now turned. Well, and the fear is also a huge buff as well, because recently they made it so that people or NPCs don't run away from you. They just stay in place. So this could actually be a pretty decent CC skill, like a crowd control skill for pretty much trash pulls in dungeons. Ring of Preservation, this morph no longer reduces the cost of roll dodge while in the area. Instead, it heals up to 6 friendly targets in the area every half second. That's a pretty big buff as well. Honestly, great changes so far for Fighters Guild and Soul Magic, and necessary nerf to werewolf fly attacks. Expert Hunter fixed an issue where this ability costs more than its original form. No longer grants, okay, it's kind of whatever. Silver Bolts. I think they have a typo here because they have Silver Bolts here, but where's Silver Leash? You know what I mean? Silver Shards now hits all nearby enemies to your original target instead of having a cap, so this could potentially have a huge use in PvE trash pulls because they increase the damage dealt. They also reduce the cost of it. So that's That's pretty interesting. And the AoE damage dealt is now 25% weaker than the initial hit instead of 50%. So they overall buff Silver Shards. So this could be the new spammable in a trash pool for stamina DPS. Trap Beast, they also improved Trap Beast quite a bit, and I'll explain how. Here it says the minor force will now properly line up with the duration rather than being 2 seconds longer. So if you read here about Barb Trap, which is a new name for rearming trap, it no longer rearms. And while that sounds like a bad thing, it's actually not. It actually increases duration of the dot applied up to 18 seconds at rank 4. So remember this, the minor force will now properly line up with the duration of the dot. So you have 18 seconds of minor force and the dot. So that's actually pretty good quality of life change for the skill, because rearming trap is honestly pretty annoying for both magic and stamina DPS to use. The damage per tick has increased as well by approximately 33%. So again, in general, a buff to rearming trap, or specifically Barb Trap now they're calling it. Mage's Guild and Entropy, I heard a lot of people talk about this. They have the same, I don't know why they applied this reasoning to Grand Healing or Healing Springs, but it's not the same case. These are two completely different skills. Entropy is actually a hybrid skill, because they're right, we don't really know what it is. Is it a hot? Is it a dot? Is it a buff? You know what I mean? Or is it a passive buff on your bar if you slot Structured Entropy? But comparing this reason, like putting this reasoning onto Healing Springs, is ridiculous, because we know what Healing Springs is. We know it's not a hybrid skill, it's just a heal over time that you can spam. That's it. We know what it is, so I don't know why they applied this reasoning of Entropy to Healing Springs. Increase the cost of these abilities to, okay, they increase the cost. They no longer heal over time. Increase the damage by approximately 220%. Jesus Christ, okay, that's a lot. Decrease the duration 10 seconds from 12 seconds. Major sorcery remains at 20 seconds. Blah, blah, blah. Structure Entropy no longer grants max health for slotting. Now heals you every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. Degeneration is probably going to be a DPS skill, potentially. No longer has a 50% chance to heal you. Blah, blah, blah. Instead, returns 100 magical when dealing light or heavy attack damage to the target while the dot persists. I'm going to assume that stacks with minor lifesteal. That's pretty insane. Also reduce the cost of the rank of the ability as it ranks up down to 2700, so it's like a 270 cost reduction total. Equilibrium, they pretty much buff balance. The Major Warrior Resolve will now be at 30 seconds, counting down at max rank rather than 27.6 seconds. I'm pretty sure Gilliam, the rogue, is saying all this stuff about the numbers. Glorious 30 seconds rather than the unsightly at 27.6 seconds. They also buff Spell Sim, increase the cost reduction granted from this ability to 33% from 20%, which is great. Fire Rune, now Fire Rune is also a huge buff as well, especially to Scaling Rune. Increase the dot of this morph by approximately 115% per tick. This is actually making us consider, for magic DPS especially, to consider using these skills, which is fine. Meteor, they removed the 6-person cap. It's gonna be pretty ridiculous for certain trash pulls. However, they did nerf the dot. I'm sure this is addressed to PvP. And that's pretty much it. They just reduced the amount of damage done per tick. However, there's no cap on it, so honestly, it's a fair balance to the skill. Psychic Order, they just nerfed Meditate a little bit, Meditate a little bit, Introspection, increased the healing by 5%. Undaunted, this is also a great change that a lot of people have overlooked. This ability and its morphs no longer have a cast time. This is great for healers and tanks that need to actually do other stuff while raiding, and it doesn't leave you exposed. Like you can't block, you can't do anything, and now costs health rather than Magicka. While the Magicka is not really an issue when casting Blood Altar, it's an interesting change because I'm really curious how much health you're sacrificing for the Blood Altar, so we'd have to actually check that on the PTS. Overflowing Altar, this ability no longer attempts and fails to rank up in the healing the synergy provides, and instead reduces in cost as it ranks up. So pretty much you're gonna be taking Sanguine's Altar. I don't know what exactly this is saying. Is it saying it never really did rank up in the healing? Because it says no longer attempts to and fails to rank up. So it never ranked up. I guess the tooltip was inaccurate. I'm not sure. Blood Feast and Blood Funnel, these synergies will now okay, so this will actually be pretty good for Stam DPS. Blood Feast now heals for 65% of the activator's max health at all ranks. So this is standard. The synergy heal is pretty standard now. Instead of increasing in healing done per rank, it's just going to be across the board 65% of your max health healed, regardless of how much you grind it. Bone Shield increase the base cost, but it's a very roundabout way of saying it. It's basically, guys, ignore this part. The cost of it will now be 3,672 for Bone Shield because of the 15% stamina cost reduction. So it's actually lower. It's like 100. It's like 100 stamina lower than the usual cost. Bone Shield will now properly rank up. Blah blah blah. Increase the damage done. Blah blah blah. I mean, nothing really significant here. However, the synergies part is pretty significant. Instead of 4 people with effects, it will now affect up to 6 allies. It's a pretty good buff. And also, however, it also reduced the size of the shields to 30% of the max health of the people with effects from 50%. So in exchange for how more people being affected by it, you get a slightly less damage shield. Inner Fire. Wow, these are pretty long patch notes, am I right? Inner Fire. This is a huge buff to tanks in PvE. Like, a lot of people seem to be missing this part. Like, 1300 magic cost reduction for one of the most expensive, the most expensive taunt in the game. And this will actually help a lot of tanks manage ads a lot better. In pretty much every instance, like trash, boss fights, whatever. I mean, this is pretty great news for every tank in the game in PvE. Also, inner range, the magic morph now guarantees the synergy instead of increasing the chance. So this is great for outcast uptime and people using synergies off of the skill, which is pretty great. The stamina morph, however, it also got a cost reduction as well, but now it also causes the target to take 5% more damage from you while the taunt persists. I can only see this being useful for the last boss in Bad Dragon Star Arena, High F the Battle Master, where you can have a Stam DPS use Inner Beast to taunt High F the Battle Master away. So you the tank can take away the mini bosses for your group to burn. But that's very specific, a very specific case I can just think off the top of my head. And here, we already discussed this at the beginning of the video. Ridiculous, like, just completely stupid. I don't know who did this, but shame on you. Radiate, whatever. They definitely nerfed the spawn ruling synergy, the spiderweb synergy, so it's kind of fucked now. I mean, even they're like, okay guys, we gave it a slight buff to dot, or the damage of the poison applied by the spiders, but yeah, it's still gonna be shit. So, the trapping webs itself reduced the cost of this ability, while it reduced the cost of what reduces damage. But however, it does deal an initial hit of damage when they land at their target location, resulting in an approximate 75% damage increase for the caster. Okay, but still, general, very solid nerf for this skill here. And Alliance War, we already discussed Caltrips, Magic Cadet. Actually a pretty great buff for both PvE and PvP. PvPers can get a lot of use out of this in smaller groups, or even 1vxers. PvEers, basically for trash, because there's no cap anymore at all. Remove the maximum limit. And Rapid's maneuver, they reduced the cost. They kind of fucked it a little bit. They reduced the duration of the Major Expedition, granted to 8 seconds from 30 seconds at rank 4. But it'll continue granting Major Gallop for 30 seconds. I believe Major Gallop is like sprint cost reduction, which, okay. Charging Maneuver no longer grants Minor Expedition after a Major Gallop ends or is reapplied. Instead, it grants Minor Expedition bonus alongside the Major Expedition bonus. This means when you cast Charging Maneuver, you get both Minor and Major Expedition at the same time for, I believe, 8 seconds. And I'm glad that they are addressing the stuck in combat issues here. And they're also addressing the bug that frequently happens when people cast weapons. Like some people don't get it, some people just lose it out of nowhere, and that's pretty cool. Vigor, no real big nerfs here, to be honest. Vigor and resolving vigor now only heal the caster. I know a lot of people were outraged for some reason about this. I don't know why, because now you have one more for AoE healing and one more for just selfish healing, which was the original intent behind the skill anyway, a long time ago. However, they increased the duration to 10 seconds from 5 seconds, but decreased the tick frequency to 2 seconds from 1 second. It's the same thing, just a longer duration on the skill. Increased the healing per tick by approximately 85%. So they buffed the healing done on both MRSA Vigor, and they also reduced the cost to from with an insane amount. That's like 1,300 stam cost reduction. That's a lot. And also, if you look at this resolving vigor morph, it doubles the frequency but halves the duration. So that's no nerfs here to be seen. This morph reintroduces the AoE healing capability, healing up to 6 allies in a 15-meter radius. No nerfs. That's cool. Warhorn, Sturdy Horn. This is for PvP. There's 15% more crit resistance. This is actually a pretty solid update because no one in PvP either really used Sturdy Horn. They use some other shit. I think most PvPers who support their groups use Aggressive Horn over Sturdy Horn because Sturdy Horn's like doesn't. Why would you need Minor Ward, Minor Resolve? I think the extra 15% crit resistance is a very great balance change towards group play for PvP, in my opinion. Emperor, whatever, support. And this is kind of weird too because originally Barrier affected 12 people, then they changed to 6 people. Now they're changing it back to 12 people. Make up your goddamn mind, you know what I mean? However, it's a general buff. It's a pretty big buff for Barrier. 12 people. I mean, you could essentially have Barrier rotations if need be for your progression raid teams or something like that. And also the Magicka, the amount of ultimate restored per shield has been nerfed by 2 from 6 to 4, but the fact that you're affecting like 6 more additional people basically means yes, it's gonna be a higher restoration of both Magic and Ultimate. So I know the leaked patch notes said, I believe the barrier cost was increased by 50, but I don't see that here, which is great, and it's just a general buff to barrier in general, which is good. Guard, reduction of the cost, again, this is gonna be really cool for healers and tanks for their sustain. Purge, it increases the amount of negative effects instantly removed per cast 3 from 2. This will make things a lot easier, especially in Veteran Halls of Fabrication. Efficient Purge will now cost 5,400, so it's a slight increase by about 370 Magicka cost. And we're just gonna forget about Cleanse over here. And that's pretty much it. I mean, this is a general buff as well. Revealing Flare, I wonder if they did anything for PvE with it. Not really. Siege Shield, again, I don't really see any use for it in PvE yet. Bloody Mara, this was a nerf that I could see coming because, I mean, like, it's kind of ridiculous for Magicka DPS to have so much health and so much more max Magicka than they should. And this is, I guess, in part to address the power creep. But also, I mean, literally doesn't really make a difference. Just use Bystat Food with False God. Like, it's not a big deal. Glyph of Bashing, whatever. And they fixed and updated a bunch of item sets, it seems. There's a slight nerf to Plague Doctor, 1000 health, fair enough. Fix 2. Quick Serpent. The biggest thing here I can see so far is Roar of Alkosh, the AoE for this ability. This is the armor penetration debuff that pretty much almost every tank in raids use, or has to use for their groups. Will now properly update when fighting dragons. So the problem with the Sunspire trial, why a lot of people thought Alkosh was suddenly bugged, it's not bugged, it's working perfectly fine. The problem in Sunspire was the hitbox of the bosses were preventing the Alkosh to go through. Even if you were standing right in front of the boss and you use the synergy with Alkosh on them, Alkosh wouldn't go on the boss. The only way you can put Alkosh as of right now on Loxties, Navintas, or Yonokrin is to go under the boss into their AoE for a brief amount of time, provided you're not the one taunting the dragon, because the dragon will fuck you if you do that. But if you are a DPS or someone else wearing Alkosh, you just have to briefly go under them and use a synergy to proc Alkosh. That's how you use Alkosh right now, and I'm glad that they're actually addressing that hitbox issue, which is pretty cool. Now you'll probably have the main things where Alkosh again. Sentinel Rukugams, pretty great change here as well, pretty great fix. Sentinel was overall useless in a lot of fights where they shouldn't be useless because it kept going to the people proccing it rather than people who need it. So it says here it will now always spawn on the target who proc the summon rather than only on the caster. So this could have been a great set for things like Boss 4 and VHOF, but it kept going to the healers or the tanks, and it's like, well, that's just useless, might as well use Symphony. So this will put Symphony and Sentinel yet again on the same level playing field. And again, it's not gonna move once it's begun channeling the heal ability. Everything else is pretty standard. Veladreth. So going back to that monster set, one of the new ones that does a conal disease damage, and it stacks up depending on how many negative effects the target has. That might actually replace Veladreth because this item set's proc can no longer hit the same monster multiple times. And that was a great thing about Veladreth for stamina DPS because you could actually hit, if you position yourself right or correctly for certain bosses, you could hit them multiple times with the multiple balls with Veladreth. But if they can't do that anymore, then probably the other monster set might actually be better. Torok's pack will no longer increase the damage of Oblivion damage enchantments. I kind of am salty about this because they could have done this for like the enchantment nerfs on one-handers. I mean, if they could do this, they could do that, in my opinion, but whatever. Warriors, Fury, they buffed the shit out of Fury. I mean, Stamina Dragon Knights actually might be stronger next patch, but I don't really PvP anymore, so I'm gonna leave it at that. Okay, so they're addressing the stuck in combat bugs in Cyrodiil, which is awesome. They're fixing a few other things, and we gotta read some of these monster abilities because a lot of people were thrown off when Clan Fears suddenly were pouncing on them, especially in areas like Maelstrom Arena, or Daedriths could CC you. All of a sudden, banning cells or Maelstrom Arena by launching fireballs at you. So let's read it. And also, this is a huge thing. I'm glad that they're fixing it, but the fact that it took them 4 to 5 weeks to actually come out with a fix, and it's not even for Elsewhere patch, it's for the next patch. It's kind of disappointing, but at the same time, I'm glad they're fixing the desync. What the issue was, things are becoming desynced in trials and dungeons and overland even. You can't loot bodies because they're actually elsewhere. You just don't visually see them. And for mechanics like interrupting Lotus, he's not actually there when you target him. He's actually somewhere else. And it fixed an issue where monsters would become visually desynced between the server and the client. Thank you. God damn. Feared monsters will no longer face their current target and instead stand still while they are feared. It was kind of creepy watching them turn around as I feared them. Gargoyle Quake is now properly telegraphed. Ice Wraith, whatever, next time, whatever. Nullifier, this could be it. Nullifiers. I'm just trying to think of where nullifiers are. Ethereal Archive, probably a few other Cragolden places. Ogrims fixed, Reef Adder fixed, Vanquisher fixed, cool. And they made a few updates to crafting economy. Nothing too significant here. Let's see. Material shipment containers retrieved. Okay. Just fixed issues, not much else. They fixed dungeon content, fixed an exploit that made it easier to defeat the Troll King. I mean, these exploit fixes with White Gold Tower and Blessed Crucible, I mean, dude, what do people really need to exploit to beat the dungeons? I really don't understand it, but at least they fixed it. But yeah, I think that is pretty much it for this video. I think there isn't much else in the patch notes besides just general fixes to Overland, UI, and quests. And there we go, we've actually reached the end of the patch notes. That was actually a lot of information taken. But thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you guys so much for sticking with me through the video. And as always, stay safe, have fun, and see you next time. And remember to voice your opinions on the forums, on ESO Reddit, to the devs about some of these ridiculous changes. Like, we just completely went through all the patch notes, and for the most part, it's all fine, it's all decent. But the fact that they came out with these ridiculous changes, especially in regards to the healing, the really weird nerfs to Dragon Knight and Nightblade, it's kind of ridiculous. I know there's like a petition out there, and you can actually find it in the public test server category here. There's actually a thread made about it that, hey, you can only have one orb active at a time. Why this should not go live? Keep in mind, yes, everyone should try to get this gone, but keep a really close eye on the PTS patch notes, because they will probably try to sneak in some other bullshit, and it's not over until it hits live, because they could change, like in the past, like last minute, what goes to live. So everybody's gotta keep diligent. You can't just be like, all right, they reverted the orb change, and ignore every other potential issue that could arise because of some of these changes. But like I said at the beginning of the video, I am of the unpopular opinion currently that the patch notes are actually mostly pretty good, barring a few ridiculous changes like these. I hope that the PTS Passion notes starting week 2 will make a lot more sense, and they'll actually take a lot more feedback, valid feedback from the community. I really do hope that Scalebreaker does not break everything yet again, like every patch does. I really do hope they come out with these fixes as well. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and see you next time.